Hi, I'm Nancy Rathbun from Completely Quilted, and today I'm going to be demonstrating the first month of the Curve It Up block of the month. So what you'll need is you'll need the Curve It Up pattern from So Kind of Wonderful. You can purchase this on our website, which is completelyquilted.com. You're also going to need the Quick Curve ruler, which you can get from our website as well. It's going to be the ruler that we'll use for each of the blocks for the curved piecing. It's a really great ruler, and there's a lot of other patterns that you can get to make really some great modern quilts with. You're also going to have your 2.5 yards of background fabric. This was in your starter kit, and that's going to be used for all of the blocks for the entire block of the months. So you're just going to take and cut off what you need just for that month. And then each month you're going to get a fabric kit that looks like this. What we've done is we've made color copies of what the blocks are going to look like with our fabrics from your kit. We've got the cutting instructions here for each color. And then we've got all of the fabrics in there that are labeled and numbered with the correlating fabric cutting chart. So it's really easy to follow along if you can't make it to our monthly demonstrations, which are live the first Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. So I hope you enjoyed the demonstration. If you aren't doing the block of the month with us, I hope that you purchase the pattern from So Kind of Wonderful and the Quick Curve ruler and support your fabric and pattern designers. Thank you.
The first thing that we need to do is get oriented with the Quick Curve ruler. Okay, so the Quick Curve ruler has vertical lines just like any of your rulers, like, you know, labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, going vertically this way. Okay, and then your other dimensions going horizontally like a normal ruler as well. Okay, and then you've got your curves. You've only got one slot to cut through the rotary cutter. Okay, and then you've got this other straight line and then a dashed line here. Okay, and then you've got these vertical lines that are dashed here and here. Okay, so when you're using the pattern, you really need to have it opened up, and you have to look at the way that the ruler's oriented, and it's always going to show you like a red dashed line of where the cutting opening here is. Okay, so that's kind of like the red is the cut opening. Okay, it's so important when you're cutting your pieces that the piece is centered under the ruler. Okay, so you have these horizontal lines here and here, and they're going to be right on top and bottom of these pieces. So I think it ends up being like 10 1/4 and like 2 1/4 here and here, but it has to be centered. So there's the same amount of inches on top and bottom, you know, that are open. Okay? If it's not centered, that your curves are going to be just taken out of a little portion of it. It's not going to be an equal curve. So I'm going to center that horizontal dash line here and here, and there's pictures of that in the pattern too. So that image in the pattern shows that. And then you're going to look at these vertical lines. So the pattern says to use the 2.5 line, and that goes right along the edge of your fabric. So you look at these horizontal lines, not necessarily the curve, okay? So it's much easier to see, you know, you're not looking at the curve when you're cutting, you're looking at these horizontal lines on the ruler. So you've got it centered here and here on those dash lines, and then you've got it along the 2.5 inch line here. So now I'm ready to make my cut. So I'm using a 45mm rotary cutter. The 60 is too big, and anything smaller than that is too small. So it needs to be a 45mm cutter, and you just put it in the channel. Of course, you don't want the ruler to slip, and you apply your pressure. And this part here is just toss, okay? And then you've got your first curve that you've cut, okay? So then the second curve is going to be cut out of the background fabric. So I've got all of my fabric layers stacked. And when I cut these, I had them stacked all right sides up, okay? So that, you know, when I cut them, they're all the same shape. That's really important, so don't miss that, okay? So you're going to use the ruler the same way I did before, where you have that dashed line lined up on the top and the bottom of the piece. And now I need to just find on the pattern, let's see, This one works a little bit differently. So instead of looking at these inside lines here, I'm going to move it up so that the 1 inch line here on my ruler is on this edge of the piece. So I'm kind of cutting, if you kind of look at my piece here, I'm cutting the opposite. So I have a larger piece that's going to be kept, and then this opposite side is going to be tossed. So 1 inch here, and it doesn't really matter, you know, what you are on this inside piece, and still making sure that these are centered. And I make that cut. So you can see that these pieces fit really nicely here and here, okay, for my curves that are going to get sewn together, okay. You're going to make half square triangles too, and there's no special curve cutting for these. So what I'm doing is I'm going to put right sides together, these pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and mark from corner to corner with my Iron Away marking pen, so that when I sew these, I'm just going to sew 1/4 of an inch on either side of that marked line that I did. So I'll do that for both of these. Then that line that I drew will be to cut it apart. So there's a little easy step for you without any curved cutting. So if you've never done curved piecing before, there's some important things that you need to know. You don't have to pin it, okay? So you don't have to pin it, but you do have to make sure that you're not stretching it. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. My machine has like this special dual feed here, which really helps because it's feeding that top fabric forward. Okay, so if you wanted to use a walking foot, you could, but just a normal 1/4 inch foot will be just fine also. But I like to engage this dual feed because it gives me a little bit more feeding without me having to like really feel like I need to stretch the fabric. So when you position these for sewing, and it'll show you this in the pattern, there's going to be about 1/4 of an inch, okay, between where you're positioning the end of this fabric here and then the edge or the point. Now you can see this one is a little blunt and it's cut off. That's okay. Okay, it's not always going to be a perfect point. It might have a little bit of a blunt edge, but you still need to have 1/4 of an inch from here to the end. Too much and it's not going to be an even piece, and too little it won't be even either. Okay, so you need to have 1/4 of an inch. And if you can't eyeball that, then you need to get a little ruler or like one of those seam guides and measure that. Okay, but I got that in my head now. So I'm going to lower my presser foot down, and I'm going to take a few stitches into my fabric. Now I'm always going to keep the edge even with the edge of my presser foot. Some of these have a guide here and that works well also, okay, but I'm just going to keep it even with the edge of my presser foot. And I'm going to guide these as 2 separate pieces, okay? So I'm not going to pin it to keep it even. I'm going to work them together independently like this. So you're going to have your background fabric with the right side facing up, and then you're going to position your background fabric on top with only 1/4 of an inch exposed. And I'm going to take a few stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide these fabrics independently. So I'm not stretching them, I'm just gently moving them as 2 separate pieces, just looking at the first inch or so in front of the presser foot. I'm guiding them on the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm just gently pushing this bottom fabric towards my left, and then I'm just gently guiding this fabric so that stays even. I'm just letting the machine pull that fabric through. And if the ends don't match up, aren't perfectly even, that's okay. It's going to get squared up. So you can see here, I just have a little bit on that end, okay, and my 1/4 of an inch here at the beginning. And so when I open that up, you should see that it lays nice and flat, and this is going to be pressed towards that aqua fabric. So now I'm ready to stitch these half square triangles. So I have that marked line from a previous step. I'm just going to lower my presser foot, keeping the edge of my 1/4 inch foot right along that marked line. And I'm going to stitch all the way down one side. Now I'll cut my thread. I'm going to turn it around and keeping that 1/4 inch right along that side again, I'm going to stitch the other side. Now I'm going to cut this on the line, so it should look like this. That'll yield you 2 half square triangles, and I'm going to press that towards the dark. So now I'm going to square this up along with my other block, and I'll be ready to sew my block together. So now we're ready to square up these pieces here that we've cut. So you can see that it's not square, okay? And you're going to use the quick curve ruler to square that up. So a lot of times it's going to be not really a guessing game, but an estimate when you square this up. So each block will have different directions on how to square it up with your ruler. Now in the pattern, it kind of draws like a red line around the rectangle size that it's going to be. And you're going to look at these points along the curve for where to position the ruler. Okay? So this one, it has us position it with, you can see this quick curve ruler here. It's on your left. All right? And then the seam is going to be, this point here is going to be a 2 1/4 mark on the ruler. So I line up that 2 1/4 hash mark along that curve here, okay, and underneath on this part as well. So 2 1/4 and 2 1/4, okay. So the whole rectangle, once it's squared up, it's going to be 8 by 4 3/4. Okay, so I'm looking at my 4 3/4 mark along this edge to make sure that I have fabric that extends beyond that. Okay, because I'm not going to be able to cut this part yet. I'm just going to be cutting these two sides. Okay, so 2 1/4 along this curve here and here, and then 4 3/4 along this inside edge, and then of course I've got my 8 mark here as well. So there's fabric extending beyond that also. So then I'm going to cut these 2 edges that I have exposed here, and then along the top, okay, and then I'll rotate this entire thing. So that was kind of like the hard part. Now everything should be lined up 4 3/4 and then 8. So that way, no matter how you sewed these curved pieces together, you're going to have that same dimension here and here, or abouts. They're not going to be touching each other. They're all independent, kind of like sashings around that center block, okay? But they do need to be that 8.5 by 4 3/4 dimension so that your block's going to all sew together properly.
Here is your finished block. I just have mine on the design wall with each of the elements that we've done today. So we've got the half square triangles, which are going to be positioned in the corners. We've got our curved pieces that we pieced together, and then we've got our center square. So the pattern has a couple different ways to do the center square. We did ours this way with one big focus print. You can see I can magically change it. This was the pattern instructions for you to make a square in the square block. So if you like this block better, you can use that one for your quilt, or you can simply make the one that we did, which you have plenty of fabric in your kit to make either version. So I hope you like making your block, and stay tuned for month 2.